President Xi put forward a global security initiative in his speech. How important is this initiative in terms of regional economic recovery and China's own economic growth?
Well, this global security initiative to me means thinking long term and focusing on the infrastructure that will shape the economic landscape in the next 20 years. And at the center of this infrastructure for the global economy would be the climate change policies. Because the world is definitely getting more divisive, especially after COVID, with globalization being rolled back. There has to be an anchor for all countries to find a common ground, to collaborate again and establish trust and therefore security. And we have seen how sanctions and trade wars have reshaped the global economy not in a good way. Even for China, it's still suffering for many of the tariffs and secondary sanctions coming from other countries. And no one would think that a world with protectionism and hostility can maintain peace and development in the long run. Then we just need to figure out a new way to really push the economy, the global economy, into a new phase.
And post-pandemic economic recovery has been front and center for such gatherings in recent months. What's your assessment of China's efforts so far?
Well, after the pandemic has started in 2020, China had made great efforts to maintain its supply chain security. It turned out to be quite successful because China had been the stabilizing factor in the global supply of especially consumer goods, which has helped the Western economies to beat their inflation. But this year, things start to change due to the changing nature of the Omicron virus. It is highly contagious. Even for China, this is a new challenge. We have seen the situation in Shanghai, and we have seen how difficult it is to combat this new virus. So for China, probably we're expecting more aggressive monetary and fiscal response in the second half of the year. But on top of that, there still needs to be more collaborations between different regions, different countries, and try to reduce the trade barriers and other type of costs as much as possible.
And supply chain disruptions have spilled over to 2022 this year. And of course, Shanghai is in trouble. It has a nasty outbreak. And the city is also a key joint in China's supply chains. What are the lessons to be learned?
Well, the supply chain disruption is still going on, and we haven't seen really the worst part yet, since the lockdown is nowhere near the end of it. We might be seeing a situation where at least a few dozen of cities will be implementing some level of lockdown simultaneously. And one lesson that we already learned is that COVID response has to be quite swift due to the contagious nature of Omicron or whatever new variant there already has been. And then we also need to try to reduce the administrative barrier between different regions. There was this new initiative issued by the State Council on establishing a unified market. And one dimension in that initiative was about reducing trade barriers and administrative costs between different parts of China. And we have seen, even during this pandemic, there are different types of lockdowns in different cities, but the biggest bottleneck was in transportation. And local officials do not want to be held accountable, so they issue unnecessary licenses to block trucks from other regions. And this can, of course, help to protect their local situation of the COVID control, but has incurred great cost for the national supply chain. And therefore, we do need to consider to establish a market where the cost of trade and transportation can be reduced drastically.